they'd run the classic good cop, sly cop interrogation. Luca and Rollo ducked behind a barrel, leaving Beck to her task. With a few crisp snaps, she roused Mr. Tolliver. Mr. Tolliver looked down and shifted a bit, testing his restraints. Beck caught herself before letting the surprise manifest on her face. She'd already gotten him to reveal his relation to Gran. This was going to be easy. Mr. Tolliver wriggled a bit in his restraints. Beck quickly removed the ropes. Mr. Tolliver rubbed the growing knot on his forehead. Beck twirled her hand, as if to prompt Mr. Tolliver to finish her thought. Beck shook her head and clicked her tongue. Mr. Tolliver let out an amused huff in agreement. Beck was on a roll now, playing Mr. Tolliver like a fiddle. Heading for the stairs, Mr. Tolliver hesitated and turned to Beck with a puzzled look. She grinned and gave him a peppy wave. With a shrug, he continued up the stairs, whistling a jaunty tune. Beck blinked slowly in disappointment. She turned to the table and began tearing small scraps of paper. Beck marked each scrap of paper and leaned back. Luca and Beck looked at Rollo with amazement. Gus looked around nervously. Eris's cry hung in the air. Luca tied a bent nail onto the line. If all you have is a hammer... Solomon stood proudly at the entrance to the drugstore, holding a brown bag overflowing with black licorice. Solomon shoveled a surprising amount of licorice into his mouth. Beck cupped her hands on the glass to peek inside. Beck flung open the door, and they all squeezed in. Luca cracked his knuckles and entered the letters into the keypad. The inside of the phone booth dropped loose from its shell. Without even the space to panic, they closed their eyes, held their breath, and accepted their fate. Suddenly, the chaotic descent slowed to an effortless landing. It was unclear where they ended up, but at least it was solid ground. The air was stagnant and smelled vaguely of chlorine. Rollo's hands hovered over the field of blinking buttons. Joseph waited for a moment in silence. He gestured toward the strange tubes. Nuncreed let out a growl of a sigh. He shook his head wistfully. Nuncreed took a menacing step towards the children. Luca began to laugh. The color drained from Nuncreed's face. Nuncreed grabbed Luca by the shoulders. His eyes were frantic. A jolt of realization struck Mr. Nuncreed. Chapter 8. The Cold, Hard Truth. Beck leapt up, allowing the suction to yank her into the dark. Dimness eclipsed around her like the shutter of a camera as she seemed to cover great distance in mere moments. Her only points of reference were glints of upcoming turns, which approached with frightening speed, only to carom her gracefully along. She heard the tinny, distant echoes of Rollo's glee. Once she stopped fighting against it, the ride was impossibly smooth. Then, all of a sudden, as if minutes had passed in an instant, light blazed into view. A burst of wintry air snuffed across her face, and she was flung out into the cold. As they rounded the corner to the frozen town square, they spotted Mr. Nuncreed inching cautiously toward a pit at its center. He held his arms out gingerly, as if approaching a beast in the wild. Upon closing the distance, Luca recognized what Nuncreed was after. Gran stood confidently at the edge, one arm outstretched over the abyss. Nearby, a wheelbarrow had been emptied out. She held a lit torch, which flickered in the bitter wind. Mr. Nuncreed turned back toward the kids, desperation in his eyes. Rollo and Beck held steadfast in awe. Luca approached closer. Mr. Nuncreed spun back toward Gran, his voice growing louder. Mr. Nuncreed winced with anguish. His voice hardened. They both now yelled, not to each other, but at fate itself, making their peace with long-held burdens. The wind howled with encouragement. They menaced at each other, both catching their breath. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Amid a blur of emotions and memories, Luca's mind flooded with questions. The wind calmed, as if to give him the stage. And in the stillness, he began to hum. After the death of his father, Luca had trouble sleeping. Each night, his mother would sit at the foot of his bed and hum a gentle melody. It was the only thing that could calm his mind. The only thing that, however briefly, could make it all seem okay. That melody pervaded every memory Luca had of his mother. Shivering in the raw snow, he began to hum it out loud. Gran lowered the torch, listening closely. As recognition slowly set in, her heart sank. Those countless nights of consolation, the incomparable loss they shared together. She let the torch fall to the snow and sizzle out. A few steps toward Luca was all she could bear before dropping to the snow herself. Through a flood of tears, she began to hum along, note for note. Luca lifted his head in astonishment. The last time he heard that melody was the last night he saw his mother. Luca blinked through blurry, watery eyes, trying to see more clearly. He could just make out the impression of a familiar face. He peered across the snowscape at the woman on her knees. Something about her was undeniably his mother, only smaller, older, changed. Luca sprinted as fast as he could toward his mother. They held each other close, and the cold retreated from their bodies. Eleanor looked down at Luca, tightening her embrace in an appeal for forgiveness. Joseph slumped into the cold, wet snow. For the first time in a long time, her voice felt like her own again. Luca gazed down at Nuncreed with pity. He looked small. Joseph stared into the snow, as if searching it for answers. Chapter 9. The Devil You Know. 7 months ago. Eleanor Van Horn crept down the maze of sterile hallways under perennial harvest. She stopped in front of the large steel door marked Deep Engineering. No turning back now. She raised a trembling hand. The stolen keycard worked as promised, and the door buzzed open with mechanical efficiency. She was immediately hit with the smell of disinfectant. It was some sort of laboratory. In one corner was a desk covered in papers. Across the room stood a tall metal pod with hoses protruding from its base. She rushed to the desk and began shifting through the piles of papers. They were experiment reports on something called Tempus liquamen. There were dozens of them, every one stamped failed. Eleanor heard the sharp echo of footsteps approaching. She was out of time. Her eyes scanned the room, eventually landing on the strange pod. Muttering a curse under her breath, she dashed over and dove inside. Mr. Kerr addressed the crowd with a sarcastic tone. Whispers filtered through the crowd. Torment dragged on Joseph Nuncreed's face. He paused for a moment, plucking a piece of fuzz from his sweater and discarding it to the ground. Kerr gave a bow of deference. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Solomon pulled a glass vial from his pocket. In one smooth motion, he downed its contents. A triumphant smile grew across Solomon's lips. His body and face began to contort and expand as he disappeared into a belching green mist. A hushed horror gripped the crowd. This is a story about change. Sharper examined his new hands. Sharper choked out a crude squawk of a laugh. Frustrated grumbles sprinkled through the crowd. William Kerr gave a subtle nod to the clipboards. A helpless quiet settled over the crowd. Sharper addressed the crowd with indignant pride. He'd planned this moment for so long that now, at the deed's fruition, it almost felt frivolous. Mr. Kerr flourished a preposterously elaborate bow. Sharper coughed up one final laugh and cracked his knuckles. And so, Sharper set about remaking the town in his own image. The fertilizer factory soon reopened for business. Sales rose steadily as more and more farmers across the countryside began to swear by its miraculous properties. Beacon Pines became famous, a secretive town that, for the right price, shared its gifts with all. Gifts that became more and more necessary in a world where winters grew longer and longer. The end. This is wrong, but things are becoming clearer now. You can feel it, right? We can't let Sharper win. He might just be the key to this whole thing. Let's see.